It's go time.
Welcome, everyone, to Quick Kicks here on Third Down Gamble. My very special guest is the head of CFL Statistics, Steve Daniel, our annual Christmas podcast. Steve, welcome to the program once again.
I'll put it this way, there's nothing like the present.
That's a very great point. Again, you're one of my favorite people to talk to.
Thank you.
You've had a trying year this year. There's a transition that went on. Obviously, in any change, there's going to be stumbling blocks. What was 2023 for you, starting way back when being put forward?
I guess if you look at my CFL career, which started in 2005, so I've been there 18 years now, I would say easily it was the most challenging, time-consuming, difficult year to have endured because of the challenges that we had. But we can overcome them, which we'll talk about in more detail, but easily the toughest year I've ever had. Just how much work it was.
It's with anything, there's growth, there's always pain. And I know at some points, like there was, especially from outside, there was a lot of frustration with Genius and how much attention they were putting to the fixes. I'm guessing now that's been sort of ratcheted up and much more of the fixes are in place.
My colleague, Jeff Creever, and I, we spend a lot of time and a lot of energy in ensuring that in real time, the data that we record and the data that we publish are 100% accurate. The hardest part for us was that play changes could not be made in the moment. We had to wait on them some. And so errors in the data persist as a game goes along. But to your point, and this is great credit to Jeff, who's a little closer to the GeniusSports people than I am. I'm a little closer to the data quality and when it leaves the building, if you know what I mean, is that we made fixes all year long and that different iterations of the program were affected as the year went on. Now and then, a change will create another problem that you weren't aware of, a new one. It was kind of like 3 steps forward and then 1 or 2 back. But I'll have to say by the end of the year, it was much, much better simply because we keep pointing out what needed to be fixed. And there are still a fairly extensive list, but it's a little more manageable and a little understandable as we head into this off season. So we covered a lot of ground, but there's lots more to do.
Now, as you go into the off season, do you take a game and beta test, or how do you make improvements now that the off season is upon?
That's a really hard question to answer. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be at all. That's standard practice. It's up to the people at GeniusSports to do that testing. The model that I've always subscribed to is this. If you have a system and it produces these results, and then you give it another system the same data, the same entries, it should produce the same results. And it didn't. And so that level of testing, I think, might be an area we can look at to say, look, we got to test this a little bit better. I'm not here to say what GeniusSports business is or not. I'm concerned about the results and how much effort it took post-game to release what we could. Jeff and I try to behave as professionally as we can in giving our clubs the best data that we can. And that will always be our standard. So off season, I'm hoping this list gets smaller and smaller and smaller as we work with them. But it was, and I'll admit it, at times frustrating. But as the season went on, less so. That I can say with 100% clarity and honesty.
Fair enough. Well, let's move away from that because that has been hashed out in the media forever. I know the commissioner has taken some hits and had to apologize. But one of the things that really I noticed there must be vast improvement was we got halftime stats at the Grey Cup.
That was Jeff's idea. And I think that we have done it in the past, but we really made an effort to be in the press box as clear as we could, to announce things that typically my role at the Grey Cup is to vet the data, of course, but I sit with the announcer too, right beside them, or announce myself and say, this is a set of data that you as media can absorb. Here's the second down conversions, or here's some analytic. I announced a bunch of that. And so what we tried to do was get as much information out as quickly as we could. And the halftime stats were a big part of it. I loved that choice Jeff made. And I think we're going to try to do that much more often, maybe in the playoff games and things like that. But that's a feature that maybe down the road we can do all the time.
Which would be cool, because one of the things that I really enjoyed about it, and especially looking back at that Grey Cup, you can see what happened in the first half, how Winnipeg was doing this. In the second half, they weren't. Montreal, Cody Fajardo, especially in the second half, was laser sharp and picked apart a very stout Winnipeg defense.
I think I wrote in my notes, Don, that he completed a whole bunch of passes in a row. Was it 12 or 13 or 14 or something like that? Started me looking at the record book for that. And just the quality of Cody's performance comes out in the numbers that I've got. What I typically do is I chart as the game goes on where he's completing his passes, what trends are there. And we actually shared that a little bit with the people around us. And that sort of analytical approach to the Grey Cup for me is just flat out fun. I love taking that game apart. And I've got 30 Grey Cups done that way that I've never published. And I have to admit that drives me to the end of the season. I'll tell you that. Analytics is a big part of my life, and here and at UBC, and it's same skill set and the same drive to say this is how the game breaks itself down. And I enjoy that.
It's the story within the story. It's what everyone says, well, the Alouettes did this, the Bombers weren't able to do this. But then you come with the data and you say, look at this. This is what it's teaching us.
That's this. And like I've mentioned once already, my work at UBC, it's the same thing. Statistics, football particularly, are all about patterns. They're all about the pattern of decision making. I try to take the statistics and work backwards to get at the decisions that go into them. My least favorite word throughout any day is the word stats. To me, they're results. They're results of decisions. And so if you look at Dalton Schoen catching only 3 or 4 passes in the game, there's a reason for that. And to find that reason, if you look at Montreal's defense, they're extremely athletic. They're not big, but boy, they covered a lot of ground. And when you have a player of the quality of Marc-Antoine Decoy or Tyrese Beverette, it's like they're all Sam linebackers. Everybody behind the line of scrimmage could play that position on the Alouettes. And that was hard for Winnipeg to confront, and a surprise, I'm sure. But, they deserved to win that game analytically and in the patterns that I was seeing. Good on them.
You would have been hard pressed to find anyone that would have chosen the Alouettes to win the game going into the contest.
For sure.
And yet, here we are. They are the champions.
For sure. They were a surprise to me. But then when you look back at it, I know it's hindsight, but just the way they played the game, they were patient, and they really played to the strengths of their defensive guys. Their offense is, I guess you could characterize it as pretty standard CFL, average in rankings and things like that. But on the day, boy, did they ever raise themselves up. It was at a level I hadn't seen them. And then Cody Fajardo, people describe Cody as kind of Mr. Average. I don't cotton to that. He's got this range of ability. He's got a good arm, and he's smart. And he plays to his strengths. He throws the ball, put it this way, successfully. They're not a deep throwing team, which surprised the heck out of me on that 3rd and 6, 3rd down play at the end. They throw the ball 35 yards downfield. Who's going to do that? The probability of completing a pass of that kind is probably 10%. And they did it. Wow.
Exactly.
That shook me. Okay. It wasn't what I was called, but then thankfully I'm not their coach. It was really well executed. Good on them.
You look at that sequence. At the beginning of that, Fajardo is sacked for only the 2nd time in the game. On 2nd down, he has to hot-foot it outside, and he's trying to make it up himself, leaving that 3rd down.
Yeah.
And then you've got Austin Mack, who played lights out, doing an in route, and Cole Speaker runs down the sideline. Winnipeg thinking, well, they only need 6. They jump the interior guy and leave Speaker alone.
And if Speaker's ever going to catch a pass in this league, more important than that one, I'm not sure we could find one, but that's right. That's the pattern in what they did, is they did the unexpected. And I've always said this kind of to myself, but one of Winnipeg's many strengths is that they do things in a very unexpected way. They follow the formula. They have their players and their strengths, but then all of a sudden they do things that surprise you. It's this sort of unexpected nature of their play calling that really makes that sort of diversity. Well, they had that right back at them. They had their own strategy applied to them. I have nothing but respect for the Bombers. They're a really great organization, but they didn't win.
Let's look at this in another way too. And I've talked about this on this podcast before, but if Cole Speaker doesn't have to slow up to catch the ball and Parker doesn't tackle him, Montreal may score on that play. Then what have you got for the final 35 seconds?
Yeah, that's the old thing. It's never over in the Canadian Football League. 35 seconds is an eternity, especially when you're now kicking off from the 30 or taking the ball at the 40 after a field goal. We couldn't then, of course, but field position starting point this year on average was, I think, the 38-yard line, which is fairly far upfield. And so you could expect them to get a pretty good starting point and be 2 first downs away from being able to come back. And so there's all these things that are kind of running through my head as I'm looking at it from an analytical point of view. It just all played out like it was planned. Their coaches are smart. And I tell you, I've known Northrop for a long time. The questions he asks of our statistics after each and every game are amazing. He misses nothing. No one questions our statistics in a good way, better than Noel. He analyzes every single tackle. And I got a funny one to tell you. He's so profoundly focused on his guys. There was a play that ran from somebody's 9-yard line. They ran one play against his defense, and it gained a yard or a yard and a half. And then the next play. And they both, if you combine the two, they combined to exactly 4 yards or something. He questions the first one, saying, well, we didn't gain 2, we only gained 1.5. So we should reduce that play to 1 yard. So I said, no, but that would change the next one to 3, wouldn't it? And he goes, oh yeah, right. Because it moved from the 9 to the 5. It's a compliment for him. It's his level of attention to detail. That could be said about, I think, the entire Montreal organization.
Analytics, statistics. Since you've been there, how has it taken root and how is it growing?
When I got to the CFL and got the full-time job in 2007, I'd been a contractor for a little bit, I have carte blanche. Just tell us what you're going to do. That's all. You can do whatever you like, but just tell us what you have in mind. And so I looked around and we had nothing, 0. All we had was just the basic 3 yards per rush, completion percentage type numbers. And I thought, okay, well, what makes sense? So I made a list. People didn't talk about second down conversion percentage in those days, or even red zone, or the stuff now that has become, and this is the way I like to put it, Don, it's now become part of the language of our game. And if you listen to a broadcast and compare its sophistication to a broadcast in 2007 or 6, there's your objective measure. They're talking about these things. And now the clubs consider it. So I created this game analysis report in 2008, and nobody even looked at it until about a year went by and they started to ask questions. What's this mean? How do you define that? What's a big play? And now when you watch an NFL game or our game, it's all about explosive plays and converting, and analytics are now part of the way you talk about football. That's where I derive my joy from. And I had to start from basically a blank slate. I had learned a bunch of that when I was in the NBA. I brought that logic with me because I was part of my role on our Memphis Grizzlies was to take apart each possession. We had, what play did we call? What happened? What plays do we call against this opponent on the road? That. And now the game analysis report's like 15, 16 pages. Both sides of the ball, special teams. It's just become, and especially in the last 2 years, really something even different than I envisioned in 2008. It now encompasses what I would call our whole product. What are we selling out the door? What is it you get when you turn on or attend a CFL football game? So that's where analytics, for me, that's where I contribute. So look, I can give you stuff to talk about, but also stuff to help you run your club. They're two different uses of the same process. That to me means it's going to stay and be part of that language. This is our game, and you can understand our game by understanding these things. The test of it is if you look at, say, second down conversion, the 4 top-rated second down conversion teams were Winnipeg, BC, Montreal, and Toronto. What's that tell you?
Top 4 records.
Yeah. That's what those correlations between the analytics and winning or losing. That's a big part of it. If it doesn't, why?
The good coaches, they look at that information. They say, wait a minute, we're at the bottom here on second down.
Yeah.
What are we doing wrong? And then that helps them coach up their teams, puts different emphasis on different play sets.
Exactly. One of my more favorite statistics is second down conversions are fine, but what is the average yards to go by team? So with Winnipeg, theirs was, I think, 5.9 yards. Edmonton or Ottawa, I think, it was almost 8. That's an enormous difference of, and it gets a little bit skewed if you get an 80-yard completion for a touchdown on first down or something like that, but there aren't many of those. On average, that's 2 less yards to have to gain. And that opens up so much more of what's in your playbook and strategy. But that's a really key one that I think it started about 4 or 5 years ago. When someone says that on the air, they're reading it and listening. I like that. That's another test. Wow. How about that?
Well, think of it this way, too. And you mentioned it. Like Ottawa has to gain 2 yards on average more to get another first down on second down. Well, how many times does that happen? It's not just the fact that they do it every once in a while. This is how many plays do they have and how many times does this play out?
The average number of second down conversion opportunities in games is around 24 or so. So if you were to say, okay, 10 or 11 of those are influenced by this. So there's 11 opportunities where they're in much longer situations in second down than Winnipeg or BC would be. And that adds up. If you convert 3 less times, that's 3 drives where you're forced to kick. And that hurts. I've also tracked the percentage of the time that a team will get a touchdown or a field goal. They'll get something substantial out of a drive. And with Winnipeg, I think I use them as the model because their numbers are pretty good. They're upwards of 50% of the time they're scoring in some way. And that's why I included field goal percentage in this kind of game quality index that I take all the data and merge into. Field goal percentage is important because if you miss field goals, they're coming back at you out of the end zone. No one gives up singles anymore unless they have to. They are running the ball out of the end zone at a rate that I've never seen before. So these are trends in the game you notice. So making field goals, you get the points, and then they have to start over. So, yeah, there's all these little trends inside the game that are fascinating to observe. And our coaches, they like to ask about it. How are we compared to somebody else? And I get that question a lot, which is gratifying.
Unanticipated outcomes. You would have thought that given that after a single, the ball is now being moved to the 40, that teams would be more reticent about running the ball out of the end zone.
That's what I thought too. And I'm going to run it out. I think it's the player inside the player. I have a chance to make a big play here, and I'm not going to turn down that opportunity. I think that's why. But I'm not a player. I think, all right, break one tackle or something, and now you've got an opportunity to get the ball farther upfield or score a touchdown. And maybe that's it. It's hard to know. I'm curious about some teams. They will not try 50-yard plus field goals under any circumstances. Others, all for it. I know it's got something to do with the wind and things like that, but under normal circumstances or conditions, they won't. I find that fascinating as well, to look at the different strategies teams have. And some teams simply do not want it. I know no one wants to turn the ball over, but it's almost like avoiding it as much as possible and playing the game as conservatively as possible. Other teams, much less so. So you see this in the data. And then I had one team, actually two teams, contact me and say, can you come to our office and explain all this stuff and then tell us, what do we do on 3rd and 4 at this part of the field? What is the probability? What would you do? And I'm thinking, oh, wow, thanks for asking. And I'll help every team equally. Just if you want to talk about analytics, I'll be on the next flight. And that to me is really, I've done that, I think, for 4 different teams. And again, it just says, hey, this stuff matters. Some teams I never hear from at all. There's one team I don't think I've ever talked to them ever. And I think I know why. It's not that they don't like what I'm doing. And I am so far from perfect, I'll tell you. You have to try things. And some things work and some things don't. But with respect to this one club, they see it as so important, they go out and do it themselves so that they can get it instantaneously. And so we don't need you because we can do it ourselves. But we see what you're doing and we kind of like it, so we're going to do it that way too. But we'll do it ourselves. And I'm all right with that.
You would think, though, on some level that they want independent verification.
They'll compare. Yeah, they'll compare. And I think they'll always look at what you give them and say, wow, we got something different. But for me, some decisions are a little harder than others. And the hardest one for me is sort of this left, middle, right on our field because our hash marks are so close together. What's middle? It's not very wide. When you kind of sector the field into its parts for passing. And that's another thing I don't really like doing very much is, okay, these are completed passes in this area and trying to pin it on a particular defender. I never do that because defenses play as a team. And so there's a lot more factors in it than just saying this guy had 12 passes completed against him in his area this game. I stop well short of that. It's like drop passes. Some groups who analyze football games want that all over that. I don't even look at it ever, because you don't know what's between the quarterback and the receiver. You can't. Some of them are obvious, of course, but not in general. And it makes a player look bad. Who wants to do that? The coaches can do that on their own. Thank you. You have to be a little careful about some of these things because they're people. So am I. I mean, I get people dump on you, but not often. That's the one thing I like about the CFL the most, is that people tend to respect one another fairly well. And I've always been treated with respect by whoever I'm working with and for. That's one thing I love about our league.
You talked about the hash marks and trying to figure out what's left, right, and center. They're 8 yards apart right now. I believe in the 50s, they were 8 yards away from the sidelines.
They've been coming in on a pretty regular basis ever since then. And I look at when I was scoring games from the 50s and 60s, I think, the same field? And, the difference in the goalposts and stuff like that. It reminds me of that play. I think I mentioned to you a couple of times. I actually got a chance to see the play. And that was the BC Lions were kicking a field goal at Toronto. And talk about changes of the rules. Gary Schreider, he was with the Lions for only 1 year, and he attempted a field goal, hit the right goalpost, just dropped in the mud on the 2-yard line. Everybody sort of stood around. Well, Gary wandered down, picked it up, ran it in the end zone for a touchdown. Thank you very much. And he didn't score a whole bunch of touchdowns in his career, but that was one of them. And of course, right away after, they changed the rules that it was a dead ball as soon as it hit the uprights. So the size of the field and the markings on it, like we had a thing with punting, we would do inside and outside the numbers. Well, there's not that much room outside the numbers. If you're going to punt out there and you're risking a penalty, which is a whole nother area of analytics, which I find really intriguing.
Well, especially if a coach is risk averse.
Yeah.
Does he want his punter to take that chance and maybe get that 10-yard penalty for not getting it out inside the 10?
Well, we've got a bunch of global punters and kickers, and to be honest with you, they were so effective. And I think we had the highest punting average in the history of our game this past year. People like Cody Grace and Joseph Zima and long timers like Richie Leone, and they're really good. So we have the best group of punters in the history of the league is on our teams today. Our field goal kickers bounced back from an off year last year, and they were at 85%. Exactly the same percentages in the NFL, 85%. And that's another thing that my boss has me doing is I track each and every NFL game in some way so that I can track their analytics against ours, right down to third down conversion, and track by their standards, and then compile all that data into some sense of what the quality of their game is. And so when you look at a game that, like there was 2 weeks ago, wasn't there an NFL game where the score was 3-0?
Minnesota and at Las Vegas, yes.
Oh boy, that's there's a whole lot of 3-and-outs there. So we had one years ago. Ottawa and BC was like 7-5 or something like that. So their average scoring is down a lot. But I don't want to diss the NFL in any way whatsoever. They have a different way than us and a different rule set. That's one of the things that we track too is big plays, and the likelihood of a big play in our league is considerably higher because of our rules. Specifically on offense, our players can be moving forward at the snap, the receivers and running backs. In NFL you can't. And that makes a substantial difference. So there's a few of those that lend itself to our game. Just the base at the foundation.
Heard this repeatedly from corners that have played in both leagues, is that in the NFL, you can use the boundary as an ally. In the CFL, it's just not there. It's too far away.
It's too far away. Throwing from the right side, and boy, that's a lot of ground to cover. So their game is just, it's kind of the whole field setting thing with 11 guys, some of the speed and size of the players they have. I'm amazed they can score at all. It's a testament to this. And one statistic I track very carefully is the number of different quarterback starters in a given season. And for us, ours wasn't too bad this year. We had, if no quarterback ever gets hurt, you're going to have 9 different starters. This year we had 21. A few years ago it was 25, which is awful. NFL, their minimum would be 32. But I think they're already up to 50-something. So quarterbacks are fragile. Like, look at Aaron Rodgers. Goes down in, what, 3rd or 4th play that he was in the game for the Jets. Replacing quarterbacks is tough. For us, that was the thing. For me, there were 2 core trends that I enjoyed the most. And that is the performance of our Canadian players, like Nick Dembski and Brady Oliveira and Ben Halak from the Lions. And players like that, the performance they had is indistinguishable from any other player. I don't care where you're from. And the fact that the quarterbacks we put in to replace injured number ones did better than the number ones in many respects. Look at Trey Ford, Dustin Crum. They were really good at times. Jake Delgado was terrific toward the end of the year. Being able to have a quarterback come in and not affect materially what you're doing, that's one of the strengths of our game as well. All games have weaknesses, and we do too, but that was a good one. We're fortunate.
Taylor Powell in Hamilton, another one.
Another one. He was great. It was seamless, and you had a guy like Cody Fajardo steps up his game even better than he was before. Or look at Vernon Adams, the year he had. So you lose Nathan Rourke, and you think, okay, down we go, and our overall passer rating was comparable to the year before. It was little, if any, different. It was much better than 2 years ago, the first year after the pandemic. Season cancellation in 2020. We chart that very carefully. That's part of what we call the quality of our game. And for us, the graph is up. And I think the commissioner was talking about that. That is state of the league at the Grey Cup. That's what he was referring to in many cases. We have distinct ways of measuring it internally among our executive group. Part of my job is to give them that objective set of measures to say, this is how we measure how we're doing. And I do that every week and give them a report. And my boss is great. And he takes it to their meeting and he describes, this is why, or this is why not. And we have to admit, we started very slowly last year, but boy, it built. And if you look at our numbers after week 8, and that was part of the final season-ending product review, the numbers up to week 8 were weak. The numbers from week 9 to 21 skyrocketed. Scoring was up, way up in the final 13 weeks of the season. Everything, every metric you can name, all of a sudden after week 8 went straight through the roof. Why? Something changed after week 8. To this day, I'm still trying to find out why. but I liked it.
I just wonder if teams are starting to gel and things are starting to make sense, because you've got a very short training camp in the CFL, and I do believe that probably the first couple of weeks they're still trying to sort themselves out.
Yep. After 8 weeks, you've identified who your guys are. You've got a more stable roster. There's all those things. And I think that's a pretty good explanation. But to be that profoundly different, to have scoring over the final 13 weeks average, what was it, almost 53 points a game compared to 45 in the first 8 weeks? That's an extra touchdown a game. Second down conversions, 3 or 4 or 5% higher. Huh? Okay. Thank you very much. Or big plays. Instead of 5 per game, now we've got 6 per game. That may not seem like much. Or kick return touchdowns. We haven't got any. All of a sudden we have 17. All 3 phases of the game are there. Or sacks were huge in the first 8 weeks. And then they flattened right out. offensive lines, like you just said, Don. And he's starting to figure it out. And offensive lines are dominated by Canadian players.
Case in point, Montreal Alouettes, we go right back to that Grey Cup game where the Owls had averaged roughly 5 to 6 sacks allowed a game, 2 in the Grey Cup.
Yeah, what a difference. They just performed at a level that was impressive. Everything about what they did. Just watching and thinking, okay, well, guess that's that. All of a sudden, they make plays that change the outcome. I was really impressed. And it was such a compelling Grey Cup for that reason. I think I've been at, 15 or 16 now? And it was easily the most unpredictable, wild, crazy game, I thought.
We've had 2 in a row where the fourth quarter, if you looked away, you missed something. The other game that was so unbelievable was that Toronto victory over Calgary in Ottawa in 2017.
Yeah.
Where a 9-9 Argonauts team beats the Juggernaut.
Yeah. That was just a shock to me. Again, but you like that. You want that level of uncertainty. And that in the product review that I do, I always analyze where we are so I can give suggestions and ideas to our executive committee. Say, look, this is what I'm observing. Look for yourself. And that quality of uncertainty right to the end is something we measure very carefully. In the NFL this year, it's almost by default because the scoring is so low. Most of the games are one-possession games. Whereas this year, I think it was 60% of our games aren't decided until the final 3 minutes. That's a pretty big number. That can only help our product because you're holding fans farther into the game and entertaining them, which is ultimately one of the things I'm there to measure. And that's why I think it's a privilege to be able to do this, because I might have an idea and my boss think, And then all of a sudden someone thinks, wow. And all of a sudden we do it. And all of a sudden my boss will come back and say, wow, this is great. It's kind of the opposite of the classic Steve mistake of quarterback pressures. Never doing that again. But I'll leave that to the coaches to figure out.
Speaking of quarterback pressures, what do you think of PFF? What does that mean to you? Is it good for the league to have that? What do you think?
I think it's good to have an objective outside group looking at it. I wouldn't call it negative. My only kind of maybe objection or something like that is that if you publish stuff that they're doing, and they've got great ideas, lots of them, it looks like we published it, whereas I stay away from some of those things like quarterback pressures. The thing is this: if you're going to publish analytics, statistics, anything, explain what they're based on. Tell me how you calculated that. Tell me how you differentiate when a play with a quarterback pressure and one without, when the differences are so subtle. And so, is it or is it not? It's like I'm just grading an exam right now. Is that what the person meant to say or not? That's my only complaint. Objectivity really matters to me. This is a big play, and this isn't. That's why my least favorite play in the whole game is a 29-yard anything, because the threshold is 30. Yeah, it's at its core. You mean to tell me it's not a big play if you gain 29 yards from the 30 down to the opponent's 1? Of course it's a big play, but you got to draw a line somewhere. So with Pro Football Focus, I think there's lots there that the fans love, and that's great. I just like a little bit more explanation as to how some of this gets derived. That's all. That's my perspective on it.
We're into the off season. What's next on your docket? What do you have to do?
We have our winter meetings, and this year they're down south, so I'm heading there. I got a chance last year out west in Alberta, Calgary, or near Calgary, to stand in front of presidents, general managers, and head coaches in a room where they could tear me to shreds. And I would like that because it gives me nothing but good feedback. And then I present them the analytics in depth. So I can go into each one and say, okay, this is what it means for you. And they'll have the whole in front of them. And then they'll say, well, I don't like this one, or can you do that one? And it becomes a dialogue. And so I'm traveling to the United States in January at our winter meetings. And then that has a component also of the rules committee. And so, okay, here's a rule, and we need data to support it. Should we do this? Or do you have data on that? And I have data that I don't publish, but I keep it just in case. It's like I'll take our plays. There's 150, the average is 146 plays a game. Say 150 in round numbers. I'll take apart, what are those plays? Special teams, offense. What kind of offense? Was the play negated by a penalty? Did the play even start like procedure? So I can characterize a game, say this is our game, consists of these plays. And then at that level of depth, this group is listening. And so for 30 minutes, I get to stand there and say, okay, here's what I see. And that is so fun. And then you take that into the rules committee and say, okay, what can we do to make this better? What else would you want? You know, I can't imagine asking for anything else.
It's an amazing experience to have.
Well, I'm fortunate to be in the position I'm at, and they've kind of said some good things to me this off season, which maybe we'll find out about later, but it's been from a personal side lately, it's been pretty good. So not bad for someone who's not the youngest person in the world anymore. I've been doing it a long time. So, hey, you know, it started in the NBA, and it's the same set of ideas. Here's the game, and here's the pieces. Now let's put them together and see what we got. And that is just heaven to have as a job. Why not?
Steve Daniel, thank you so much for doing this again. I really appreciate talking to you. This is always a treat for me.
Thank you, and I love your show. It just gives me a chance to kind of think about what it is we're doing, because you ask good questions, and I always appreciate the chance. Thank you, Don.
Thank you for listening to our show. Third Down Gamble is hosted on Podbean and can be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. Follow us on Twitter at Third Down Gamble. Join us again at the Third Down Gamble podcast. Audio worth watching.
Third Down Gamble uses the expert resources provided by Canadian Football League Player and Game Statistics for analytics, game notes, and statistics, and 3downnation.com for news, insight, and in-depth analysis. Please visit cfl.ca and 3downnation.com for the most up-to-date information on the Canadian Football League.